All right, welcome back. Now, after so much uproar and strong criticism, the Lagos state government has finally taken concrete steps to do something about the general suspension of former governors and political office holders in the state. The Lagos State House of Assembly has now amended the pension law for former governors, slashing their benefits by half. The payment of huge amounts as entitlement to former governors has been a subject of discussion for years because most Nigerians see it as a waste of public funds. Late last year, Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu moved to stop this through an executive bill presented to the House of Assembly. The state lawmakers have now approved the report of its Committee on Establishment, Training and Pension, which recommends the reduction of the benefits and other emoluments due to former governors and other political office holders in the state by 50%. Don't forget, what the governor had actually proposed initially was to repeal the law completely, but what the lawmakers have now done is to slash the entitlements of the former governors and their deputies and, of course, other political office holders by 50%. So the law initially provides that a former governor of the state shall receive 100% of the basic salary of the incumbent governor, a house each in Lagos and Abuja, 6 cars every 3 years, and all expense paid medical treatment for the governor and members of his family. That's a former governor now. But under the new amendment, former governors and their deputies will now be entitled to 2 instead of 3 vehicles, which will be changed every 4 years instead of 3. But the question is, does this go far enough? Does this really address the concerns that people had actually raised at the very beginning? Joining me now to discuss this more, I have Lanre Suraj, who joins us from Lagos. He's an anti-corruption activist and the chairman of HEDA. HEDA, by the way, is a human environmental development agency, I should say. And then we also have Adewale Ajadi, who is a lawyer and a political analyst, who joins us from London. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Let me start with you, Lanre. What do you make of this? Does this go far enough? I mean, because this clearly falls short of what the Kwara State government now did in January of this year. In the case of Kwara, the law was completely repealed. Everything cancelled for former governors and political office holders. But in the case of Lagos, it's been slashed by just half.
No, I think it's just not even Kwara alone. It's also the same thing that went with Zamfara State. Unfortunately, you would want to remember that this whole heist actually started with Lagos State. Lagos State pioneered this illegal and unconstitutional act of, the most archaic mentality of public office holder that assumes that public funds are just for public office holder, and about public office is just to be totally pampered in all whatever ramification that the resources of the states can accommodate, and that is the mentality that you still have with I think also over pampered members of the Lagos State House of Assembly. You would also remember how the assembly has been taking care of itself with several jumbo pays, with SUV vehicle for members of the assembly, which also led to the controversy and crisis that nearly consumed the Speaker of the Lagos State House of Assembly with the EFCC. And that mentality is still being extended into this case. So you can
Percent
see
is just not enough.
yeah, you can see what happened with the Lagos State governor actually submitted a bill to say scrap it.
Scrap it.
Many of the other governors did the same, but these guys, because of their so-called psychophancy, their hypocrisy, and also archaic mentality of office, is still looking at retaining not even just 50% slash, because when you reduce 3 vehicles to 2, that is about retaining 70% of what was contained. So let's not be deceived by them saying it's 50%. That is not 50%. When you say the vehicles should be changed 4 years instead of, 3 years instead of 4 years, that is also not 50%. That is also still retaining about 75%. of
But then
what goes.
they say they've removed the issue of houses for the former governors and their deputies in Lagos and Abuja.
Well, you see, the most important thing that he's here is to go legally with them. So it was the responsibility of the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation, and Fiscal Commission to determine what would be the emolument and severance packages for public office holders. So the arbitrariness of Lagos State that started with the former first civilian government under the democratic dispensation in 1999 is actually an aberration, and there's no justification for this so-called slash that was used to placate. And the House of Assembly, and if the governor is in any way honorable, I think he would refuse to assent to this bill and return it to the Assembly, making it clear the demand of the executive that submitted the bill was the scrap of that bill. And simply the House can't come back and be so generous like a Father Christmas and give to people what they said they don't need. And the governors...
Let me pause you there and get the reaction of Mr. Adewale Ajadi. Mr. Ajadi, for you, what do you make of this? Because in all honesty, what the governor actually had asked for was a repeal of the law completely, cancel everything. I mean, the same thing we saw in Kwara, and of course, Lanre mentioned Zamfara. And even in some other states too, I mean, the conversation is going on that you should just cancel this whole jumbo pay. But in the case of Lagos, the lawmakers have decided to make it 50, well, according to them now, they slashed by 50%.
I genuinely think it's unacceptable. I think that there's a fundamental principle that we have to attach to this kind of thing. Why are we paying these people in the first place? What is the principle that we are trying to mete out to pay them any amount whatsoever? If it's a pension requirement, then there ought to be the principle that guides this kind of thing, rather than arbitrary, you scratch my back, I scratch your back. As you know, I do not think that the state governments are accountable in Nigeria, period. I think there is a level of, there is no checks and balances, as we can see in this case. I think the fundamental issue here is this is public money. In a country where up to 60 million young people don't have work, this creates a kind of, I don't even know the word for it. It is not necessary, not sustainable, and it's not acceptable. And Lagos state government is always the pioneer in Nigeria of good things. It needs to go back to being a pioneer of good things, not something as bad as this.
And probably what these lawmakers are not thinking about is the fact that, you know, say 10, 50 years down the line, the turnover of former governors and deputies and other political office holders you're going to have would be so huge. And the question is, you look at that, will the state be able to continue to pay for these huge number of former political office holders that you would have? And somehow it appears the Speaker of the State House of Assembly would benefit from this as well.
Certainly, and that's the problem. That's the problem. You are there to serve the people, not yourself. Part of our problem is deeper than what we are talking about. Part of the problem is that this is a way of clawing back political amounts that they spend for elections and patronage. Until that is capped at a particular level, the level of corruption will always increase because the outlays are too much. The outlays that they invest in gain political office. So it is a business. So we need to get to the root cause of it and also identify very clearly that this reduces the participation of the people in the political process. We cannot have a commonwealth that is dominated by people's ability to corner it and keep it for themselves and their children. That's totally unacceptable.
But sorry to interject, but what do you make of the argument? And this is by no means me playing the devil's advocate here, but what do you make of arguments that, look, you actually need to provide this kind of compensation so that when people get into office, they don't resort to stealing from the public purse?
That's the point I made earlier. You see, you have to be clear about what principle you're trying to establish here. And then let us hold you to account and question those principles if they're sustainable and set standards to measure you. So if we say the purpose of it is to prevent corruption, let's check whether corruption is actually happening. Let's evaluate what happens under that governance and establish whether you have taken money or you have allocated contract in any way. If you are going to set standards, they have to be measurable, they have to be discernible, and they have to be evaluated for their impact. Then you can justify yourself.
Lanre, I have to ask you this. In the case of Kwara, we saw that a public hearing was held, and at the end of that public hearing, the overwhelming majority of people said no to pension for former governors and their deputies and other political office holders. But in the case of Lagos, I can't remember any public hearing. I can't remember any public hearing now that took place before the lawmakers arrived at this decision. Because if there was a public hearing, then was it a unanimous decision at this public hearing that people came and said, you know what, we like our former governors. Okay, don't pay them 100%, but pay them 50%. Because I don't think that happened in this case.
You would have to understand that without fear of contradiction, I can tell you freely that the practice of democracy, accountability, and transparency is at its lowest ebb also in Lagos State. I mean, this is not just Lagos under the consideration of Southwest, but even across Nigeria. There was invitation to this so-called public hearing that was concocted by the Lagos State House of Assembly, such that invitation for that hearing was issued less than 24 hours to the hearing, and also people were given less than 24 hours to submit, memoranda to the House of Assembly. And this is usually the practice with the Lagos State as Lagos State House of Assembly. It is usually done in such a way that people are not given the opportunity to even hear about the hearing, much less to participate. And just like you rightly said, the clear indication here, and that is why I said if the governor is going to be honorable, he would actually reject this bill without accent. The Lagos State of Assembly, under the current speaker, has made several efforts. And this is very unfortunate. And this is what you get when you have characters like the current speaker in office. He's made several attempts at actually inserting this level of jumbo pay for the Speaker of the House of Assembly long before now. So the whole effort at repealing the existing bill has provided an opportunity for him to then now, rather than repeal, but insert the provision for the Speaker in the system. And when you want to also consider the whole excuse about, providing for the public office holders outside office, who was providing for you before you got into office? Why should the office be providing for you after that? Jakonde was in office as a civilian governor. Balarabe Musa was in office as civilian governor. They remained relevant throughout their life. And who was giving them this level of jumbo pay? And if it isn't sufficient for you, public office is not mandatory. It is not compulsory. It shouldn't be for people like characters that we have there now who don't have alternative address and any other means of survival outside politics, such that their entire life from the day they assume. The Lagos State House of Assembly alone gets over 1 billion naira on monthly allocation for kind of running and updates and whatever expenses that it does on a monthly basis. On a monthly basis, that goes to the Lagos State House of Assembly or under the office of the Speaker. And this amount of money is usually on monthly basis, lavished on extremely irrelevant, expenditure. And you could see what was coming into the public domain when the Speaker was under public probe. You would see how, girlfriends, wives, friends, and all manners of contracts were awarded. Even with all this, that is bedeviled in corruption. They are still not satisfied, and that is how they are. gravitate towards going for even outside office, they should still enjoy this level of perks, and support. This is also outside when some of them will get appointments. So former Governor Fashola has been a minister's son since the time he became, he exited as governor, and is enjoying all the benefit as a minister. So with that, he's still expected to enjoy this same perks of that. And that is why he personally said, I have not even taken any of it. So how do you get the justification for slashing rather than scrapping? If Fashola, after leaving office for almost 8 years, said, I have not taken a house in Abuja, I have not taken a house in Lagos, and I don't also take, it means he not only has an alternative address, he's still getting the same support and fund from the public fund, but characters are just when you have, people that are prevalent in the House of Assembly, who are so hungry in their lives that they will still just want to think that they live this insecure future, which can only be guaranteed for them with public funds. But we should and we must not only challenge this, but we can only also encourage the governor of the state to actually withhold access to it.
All right, let me go back to Wale Ajadi for the last word now. You consider this. As a governor, you can't be in office for more than max 8 years, sometimes just 4 years, like the former governor of Lagos State, Akiwumi Ambode, was in office for 4 years. So, but the max you get is 8 years. So, should you get a pension for working for 8 years, when we know that the tradition across sectors, I'm talking about both private and public sectors, that look, if you put in, say, like about 8 years of work, in most cases, you are not entitled to any pension at all. But in this case, these former governors are getting pension, and not just ordinary pension, but something hefty.
Well, you have identified the problem. I'm more concerned about the systemic nature of what we put in place, because we can get lost in the personalities and the kind of venal nature of each individual. It is very clear the Nigerian elites are venal. If you give them the opportunity, they would abuse it. So what standards do we put in place? And the standards has to be, you have to serve X amount of years before you can collect a pension. This is the proportion of pension that every public official gets as a civil servant. That can be the standard. This is what we do. This is what we can afford. We have to make it objective rather than subjective. Because the minute we make this thing subjective, it depends on the power and the ability to manipulate the public in support of your position.
And it's quite ironic that you're asking those who are going to be beneficiaries of this pension now to make the law on pension.
Well, it's inevitable in our system that that's part of it. That's why we have to vote. That's why we have to vote based on the proposals that people have and programs that they have. And we have to ask questions about this thing. We have to mature as a democracy, not just in terms of activism, but in terms of participation. Look at the last local government election in Lagos State. How many people turned up? What questions were asked? We need to get beyond the one-off intervention of personalities to making sure our system is more accountable, is stronger, and is more sustainable for our children and their children.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me now on the program. Let's wait and see if, as Lanre has said, let's wait and see if the governor would refuse to sign that bill. But well, I don't know, but we'll wait and see if that happens. Thank you very much for joining me on the program, and thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on this very important issue. Well, that's how much we can take on the program this week. We thank you very much for watching. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.